Welcome to the Dream Journal. This is a replay of a show I did with Linda Schiller in October 2022. Linda talks about trauma and especially about the growth that healing from trauma can bring. Post-traumatic spiritual growth, today on the Dream Journal. Stay tuned for the end of the show when I will play some clips from a recent show with Dr. Claire Johnson about lucid dreaming and the beauty of sex in dreams. Now on with the show. Welcome to the Dream Journal from the studios of KSQD in Santa Cruz. The Dream Journal is a weekly show where we explore the power of nighttime dreams through conversations with dream experts and with you. In the words of Carl Jung, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. The name of today's music is Revernoa, created anew by Rick Kleffel. Can dream work lead to post-traumatic spiritual growth? Today's guest, author and therapist Linda Schiller, will talk about nightmares, how to heal them, and what gifts they bring. I am your host, Catherine Bell of Experiential Dreamwork, and welcome to the Dream Journal. The Dream Journal is also a weekly podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review. But most importantly, tell your friends. Not only does it help the podcast, it also gives you a chance to talk about your dreams. Maybe they didn't even know you're interested in your dreams, but you are, so why not talk about it? So you can also find archives of the show at ksqd.org/the-dream-journal. So I'm starting with my personal work, the way that I do. And I had a kind of a breakthrough dream. It was one of those simple little dreams that actually has a lot in it. I was, there was a lot going on in the dream, but in this particular moment, I'm getting to a place where I need some help. I need someone to turn on the hot tub for me, and it's a hot tub for one, and it's going to be like this little personal journey of mine, but it's not on, and so I need some help. And a woman comes in to help, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, this is really inconvenient. I'm probably really annoying her, and maybe does she look like she's scowling? I'm not sure, and so I'm not sure that she really wants to help me. But then she does. She turns it on, and she gives me a gift. She gives me a little. She gives me a mermaid, a little metal mermaid, which is just like that's something. I don't know. It's this little mermaid. It's a gift, and so I realized that it was only me who was embarrassed, and that it isn't any problem for her to help me. In fact, she enjoys helping me, but it's like my projection. It's my assumption that she doesn't want to help me because I'm doing something for myself. And, that's kind of edgy to do something for myself. And yet I got to the place where I'm like, oh, okay. And it's a mermaid, which is, I don't know, kind of neat. There's something about being in the water, but also being able to breathe the air. There's just something about, of course, the hot tub being in the water, which I love. I love hot tubs. And so I think I'm starting to accept that people actually can like to help me. It's hard to ask for help. I feel like I'm being needy. I feel like I'm bothering people. But maybe I'm starting to realize that people kind of like to help. So now I'd like to welcome our guest, Linda Schiller. Hello, Linda. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hi, Catherine. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. You have a new book, and we have new topics to talk about. So let me tell you about Linda. Linda Yael Schiller is the author of PTSDreams, Transform Your Nightmares from Trauma through Healing Dreamwork, also of Modern Dreamwork, New Tools for Decoding Your Soul's Wisdom, and a workbook, Integrated and Comprehensive Treatment of Trauma. Get the idea that Linda is a trauma specialist. She is an international teacher, psychotherapist, dreamworker, and consultant in Watertown, Massachusetts. Linda is Professor Emeritus from Boston University School of Social Work and postgraduate trauma certificate programs. She regularly presents at the International Association for the Study of Dreams conferences, which is where I met Linda. I have seen her several times there. And she also presents at other forums in the fields of dreams, trauma treatment, Kabbalah, and healing, and integrated mind-body spiritual practice. Well, that's a lot, Linda. We have a lot there. And their websites, PTSDreams.com and LindaYaelSchiller.com. That's Linda Yael, YaelSchiller.com. Linda, hi.
Hi. That was a mouthful, huh?
It is a mouthful, but you have a lot going on for you, for sure. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about what got you interested in dreams. You're obviously a trauma specialist, and not everybody connects trauma with dreams. In fact, is it a Bessel van der Kolk? There's one book that I really love that is all about trauma and the body keeps the score. I think it's that book.
That's right.
And the entire huge book, all the trauma treatments he talks about, he doesn't mention dreams. So tell me more about dreams and how does that connect to trauma?
Sure. Well, right. Bessel van der Kolk is fabulous, and his book was really a breakthrough book, The Body Keeps the Score, where in it he looks at how trauma can show up often first in our physical bodies, even before it shows up in our minds, if it's something that's been pushed aside or, in the parlance of trauma treatment, dissociated. Yep. But he hasn't quite caught up yet with working with nightmares, and I'm hoping that'll be his next step of lifting up, because he certainly lifted up EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is one of the go-to trauma treatments now. And there's a lot in common with EMDR and REM sleep.
Oh, that's something I've been curious about, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, but let's start with your backed up to dreams. How you saw the connection with dream work, and I might get back to that EMDR topic.
Okay. I have been interested in what we call uncanny ways of knowing, since I was a kid. I wasn't really paying that much attention to my dreams as a child, but I was always interested in the mystical, in the esoteric, in the alternative way of grasping information with our intuition. So really from childhood, I had a affinity with that. And then in my early adulthood, I think the first time I had a waking dream experience, at least to my memory, is when I was in Greece after college, and I was with a friend. And we climbed over a hill looking for the beach in Greece, and all of a sudden I had this sort of liminal experience where I felt the stones and the sea sort of speaking to me non-verbally. And it was one of those aha, bone-knowing kind of things, which is, oh, there's sentience here, there's consciousness here. And then after Greece, I went to Israel, lived there for 5 years, came back to the Boston area, finished my graduate work. And the way I got into dream work was simply a friend of mine, a good friend from my dance community, moved up to the Boston area, and she said, I don't miss anything about New York City. That's where she had been living, except my dream circle. So I'm going to start one here. And will you be in my dream circle? So I just said yes. And then my next thing was, what's a dream circle? So I knew I had to say yes even before I knew what it was. And then the rest really is history. We've been going strong for close to 40 years now in my personal life. And then over the years, I began integrating my personal interest and study of dreams with my professional life as well.
Oh, interested. I'm very interested in the waking life dream moments. That's interesting, and how that ties in with nighttime dreams and also with trauma. Is there a way that we're more open to such experiences? I don't know. What I want to hear a little bit more about those waking dream moments, like the one you described in Greece.
Sure. Well, my personal orientation to consciousness is that we live at multiple levels of consciousness, not me personally, of course, but I espouse that worldview. Mm-hmm. And we have a range of consciousness from being wide awake to sound asleep. And in between, there are many other layers of consciousness, such as daydreaming or reverie or deja vu or intuition, and then there are those in-between zones between waking and sleeping that Carl Jung talks about, the hypnopompic and hypnagogic zones, where we're not quite awake and we're not quite asleep, but we're sort of straddling two worlds, if you will.
Yeah.
And if we pay attention to the dreams that come through, both when we're sound asleep, having that REM, that rapid eye movement, deep sleep, as well as unusual coincidences, what Jung would call synchronicity, or those sort of liminal, shivery aha moments of wow when we're awake, those are related levels of consciousness. So I think if we're walking around in our daily life, paying attention, if you will, to signs and symbols, and being aware of and on the lookout for, we will get messages from our waking world in the same way or a similar way that we can get them from our dreaming world.
Oh, and so can we work with those images in the same way that we work with dreams?
Actually, yes. I've had many experiences, some related to sort of incubating a waking dream. And for listeners who might not know, incubating a dream is when, before you go to sleep at night, you have an issue or a dilemma or a question that you want to solve. And you actually spend a few minutes, you write down in your journal or you think about it and you really concentrate on what's the question, dilemma that you have and you want answers to. And then you write down your dream on the same page as your question, and there'll be a connection there. You can do the same thing in waking life. If you have a dilemma, gee, I was offered this job across the country. I don't know if I should take it or not.
Right.
Let me get some kind of a sign that lets me know one way or the other which way it is. And you hold that intention. The Hebrew word is kavanah, which means to point ourselves in a particular direction. The kaven is to point yourself in a direction. So if you hold that kavanah, that intention, as you just walk around in your life, you might notice something unusual or out of the ordinary, or that strikes you as fortuitous. And that could be the answer to your question, just in the same way a sleeping dream can answer the question.
Okay.
So it's about intentionality and being on the lookout.
Okay, being open to that, being more than just in the regular space. But I just want to ask about spirituality. That is there like a connection? Like, how would you define spirituality? This is actually tricky. There's actually this great quote from Wikipedia that talks about spirituality as a wide range of different ideas with limited overlap.
That's very funny.
Isn't that great? So how do you define spirituality, and does this connect with those moments of synchronicity and also the dream work that you do so much of?
I love the question, and I love that little quote you found from Wikipedia, because sometimes, in my opinion, Wikipedia is sort of spot on, and sometimes it is so far afield. And in this one, I think they missed the boat here, because ironically, I would think that spirituality across any formal, informal, practical, or what's the word I'm looking for? Spiritual tradition is going to have a lot more in common with each other. So the spiritual sides of all of our major religions and other spiritual practices often have more in common with each other than they do with their parent religion. We've seen that over and over and over again, whether we're talking about Sufism, whether we're talking about Christian mysticism, whether we're talking about Native American spirituality, Aboriginal Dreamtime in Australia, the Kabbalah. There are, in Hindu and in Buddhism, there are threads that are overlapping and connecting, where if you study one and then you study the other, you go, oh, this is really similar. It's sort of different words for the same concept or different variations on the same theme. So it's hard to pin down one definition of spirituality, but I guess the working one for me would be that which allows us an ability to feel held in something larger than ourselves.
Oh, an ability to feel held. Ooh, I love that.
Yeah, it's a sense of the numinous and the luminous where we ascertain, not necessarily with our quote unquote regular five senses, but with our sixth, seventh, eighth, and all of our other senses, that there's more to life than just what we can see and touch, and that there is an order and a purpose to the universe that is somehow divinely inspired or directed or contained, whatever that means to you. It may or may not mean, I sometimes joke with people say the G word, right? It might be that
Right.
God is exactly the right word for you to use, but it might be the universe or the force or spirit or the land. So any of the words that evoke for us a sense of that shimmery quality of more than what meets the eye, and that connects us, that thread of connection of consciousness, for me, that's a spiritual connection.
Okay. Oh, wow. So how does this relate to this kind of connection? How does this relate to nightmares and trauma? I think most people know that people who have had a lot of traumatic responses, post-traumatic kind of a syndrome, PTSD, where we can have trauma and not have a reaction to it and not have a like PTSD around it. But when we have reactions to that, I think most people know that tends to show up in dreams as nightmares. And so, how does this all relate to spirituality?
Good. So PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. The D is actually disorder. And for something to be classified in the DSM, I think it's up to 5 now, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, it has to be present, the symptoms of upset have to be present for at least 6 months. So clearly not everyone who goes through traumatic events in their life is going to be having, whether it's nightmares or other symptoms, for full 6 months. So not everyone, this is important for our listeners to know, because we think, oh, trauma, we're going to have PTSD. Well, not necessarily, because if our system is able to return to its own balance and its own center, to whatever the homeostasis was before the traumatic events on its own, and or with help of supportive community, of family, of friends, of a spiritual practice, then we don't develop a disorder. Then we move through a period of time where we are processing upset, but then we sort of move on. It gets lighter and lighter and smaller, and eventually when people ask me, for example, how do I know whether or not I've resolved my trauma, which is a really good question, and my nightmares, how do I know if I've resolved these nightmares that I'm having? What I say is, well, among other things, that when the traumatic events are simply a memory and nothing more, then you've really moved on to resolving them. Because when you've metabolized the emotional responses, because there's 2 parts to any trauma. There's what happens, and then there's how we respond to what happens.
Right.
So when we have sort of washed clean, if you will, or rewrited the capsized boat, whatever metaphor we want to use, of our responses of fear, panic, anxiety, grief, rage, when we are no longer governed in our waking or our sleeping lives by these really strong, upsetting emotions, then we've really moved on to resolving the trauma. Doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It just means that we're no longer living our lives as if it's still happening now.
Okay.
So the role then of spirituality is one of the tools that we use to heal is to reframe. And in AA, for example, they say to turn it over, right? They say turn it over. And that's part of the spirituality. When, in whatever way, shape, or form, we can reframe what happened, we cannot be holding something in our emotional state. Often, belief in some kind of spiritual beings or higher power or place of comfort or peace, all of which are connected with the spiritual mindset, worldview, and discipline, are wonderful, wonderful tools to help move us in that direction.
Right. Okay. So you were talking about the ability to feel held. But a nightmare is for me is kind of almost the opposite of being held. Like I feel very alone usually in a nightmare. And how do we make that transition, or how does the dream, working with the dream, help us make that transition?
Well, that's a really good question, Catherine, because that's exactly the point, I think, both in nightmares and trauma, is that whatever's happening in our nightmare, we're not getting the help we need to get to the end of the dream and feel safe and be safe. So there's that sense of aloneness and being betrayed and being out there and being unsupported is often, whether it's directly or indirectly, it's sort of implicit in a nightmare. Because if we wake up and we're still being chased or attacked or potentially drowned or whatever is in our nightmare, then by definition, there's no one helping us to get away from that, or at least they haven't succeeded. Yeah. And that's the same felt sense as in trauma, that nobody's helping. So that sense of being alone is pervasive in nightmares and in experiencing trauma. And dare I say, it's an epidemic in our world. And even before the pandemic, but certainly since then, the sense of isolation and loneliness, not just being alone, but loneliness is a concomitant pandemic with the one that has a virus attached to it.
Oh yeah.
So actually, a person that who I studied with early on, Judith Jordan from the Stone Center at Wellesley College, who was part of the self and relation theory, she wrote, and I just have always remembered this quote from one of her articles, that when we heal, when we return to the scene of the trauma and know that this time we are no longer alone. That's her definition of healing. When we can return to the scene of the pain and know that this time we are no longer alone. So this idea of being accompanied in our life and in our dream and nightmare work is really key. And that's where, to bring us back to nightmares, when we work with other people, or even with another part of ourself, if we're doing work on our own with our nightmares, when we're experiencing a nightmare, our youngest, most vulnerable, most frightened parts are the ones that are completely having the nightmare, feeling helpless, feeling overwhelmed. But there's another part of us that wakes up, either in waking life, or if someone's a lucid dreamer, in their sleeping life, that is not completely overwhelmed. So having that part of yourself, or having another person or a group, like in a dream circle, help hold the space and step outside of the fear and the terror and begin to build safety before addressing the fear and terror and the nightmare scenarios is going to go a long way toward allowing us to go step by step, only as fast as the slowest part of us can keep up, toward resolving and healing the dream.
Okay. Yeah. So I see that that as we find this level of support, we can start by finding it in waking life. If we have a lot of nightmares, and maybe we also don't have the support in waking life, and so I've listened to a few podcasts you've done with other folks, and a lot of the setup of working with the dream, like maybe this is working with the dream, even though it seems like it's in the moment, is to make sure that the dreamer feels really safe and has all the support that they need, because maybe they didn't have that during that traumatic experience, and maybe they don't have that during a lot of their lives.
Right. So there's different protocols and different ways to think about working with dreams and nightmares if someone is currently safe in their life in quote-unquote waking reality in where they are right now, or if they're not. If they're still living in a situation of domestic violence, or they're living in the Ukraine, or the hurricane has passed, but they've lost all of their property, and even though their life isn't threatened anymore, they're by no means back to status quo. So we have to discern, in your life right now, are you or are you not actually physically safe? So the protocol that I developed of the Gaia method is first and foremost, and we can talk about the other scenario afterwards, if you're actually in your life physically safe, but you don't feel it, and you woke up from your nightmare. So that is when we build in safe space. We bring in and we invite, before we work with the nightmare, we invite the dreamer. If you're doing it with yourself, invite the parts of yourself that are frightened, or if you're working with someone else or a circle, invite the dreamer to bring in people, objects, pets.
Like in their imagination, right?
Their imagination, their spiritual beings, whatever makes them feel safe, grounded, and protected. People who are alive or dead, real or imaginary, pets who you have now, pets who have passed over the Rainbow Bridge, get the spirits to visit you, bring protective objects with you, whether you have a talisman or a spiritual or religious object or a magic stone that somebody gave you or you found. Anything that helps you feel safe, grounded, and protected in a way that you didn't feel in your dream or in the waking life experiences is going to allow you to be able to have one foot, if you will, in the safe place before you venture into the scary landscape of working with the dream material, so that you can toggle back and forth. And one of the tenets of trauma treatment is this notion of pendulation. So like a clock pendulum, you kind of swing back and forth between one side and the other, both in EMDR, which we talked about before a little bit, and in trauma treatment in general, and in this form of nightmare work. You get to then swing back and forth between, let's get you really safe, let's connect you with your posse, and then let's peek inside the dream, see if there's anything or anyone else inside the dream that you might have missed the first time through that you actually can anchor yourself with as a safe place or person. And then once you've gotten all your safety and you feel really secure, then you go and work with the monster who's chasing you, or the river that's threatening to drown you, or the tiger that's mauling you. But at any time, if you're starting to feel overwhelmed with the work, you get to go step back outside or step into connection with your safe posse and reground and recentered and come back to equilibrium so that you don't get re-traumatized in the process of working with the dream.
Right. So Linda, I want to go deeper into this. I want to talk about EMDR, the three faces of shadow, and a little bit more about post-traumatic spiritual growth, which is one of the things that you particularly write about and teach about. But we're going to take a short break. You're listening to The Dream Journal. My name is Catherine Bell. My guest today is Linda Schiller, and we're talking about trauma, nightmares, and spirituality. This is The Dream Journal. My guest today is Linda Schiller. My name is Catherine Bell. We're talking about post-traumatic spiritual growth. And this is broadcast live from the KSQD studios in Santa Cruz. So, Linda, so we talked a bit about nightmares and how by learning to be more grounded, more connected, more supported in our nightmares, that leads to a sense of spiritual growth. So is this something that is common, or does it happen? Does it take a certain focus on the part of the dreamer and the therapist to head in that direction, or is this something that evolves naturally, that we tend to, if we come through the post-traumatic stress syndrome, to feel more connected spiritually, more supported, more held?
So the answer could be D, all of the above.
Okay.
So some people who have enough internal resilience and external support move through their difficult times and come out the other side not only intact but stronger. Not everyone does that, and it's not a judgment either way. Everyone is different, and with attention. And again, if we point ourselves in that direction, right? If our intention is to move toward healing and to move toward the ability to come into enough peace and understanding with whatever we've gone through, we then get to be in a place where we can help others as well. And that's part of what we get out of being experiencing trauma, or people who have survived trauma, which is pretty much everyone on the planet at this point in time because of the state of the world. And sometimes people come by it naturally, and other times we have to really work at it and we need help. If it's okay with you, I was thinking about your dream, that you shared in the beginning? I don't know if you'd
Yeah.
like me to make any comments about it in connection with this question.
Sure, that would be fine.
Okay. So
So we could probably review a little bit. Did you want to summarize, or shall I? If
well,
people are tuning in now.
let me give my, on one foot Reader's Digest version and tell me if I missed anything important.
Perfect.
Okay, so you're wanting to take a hot tub, you're having trouble getting it on, turning it on, and you're kind of reluctant to ask for help. You're a little bit like, oh, I don't want to be needy, I don't want to ask for help. But then this mermaid shows up to help you. And in the process of her helping you, you realize, oh, that's my projection. I think that was the word you used. It's really okay to ask for help. And this is something actually that I'm learning to be better at, is to be able to ask for help. I put words in your mouth there, but that was
no, that's all correct. There's just one distinction, is that it wasn't a mermaid that helped me. It was a woman, a human woman. And I thought she was upset about my asking, but then as she left, she handed me a little metal figurine of a mermaid. And that's how I knew that she wasn't upset, that she actually enjoyed helping me, and she was giving me this special gift.
That's great. Well, that's a great distinction, and thank you for clarifying. I actually did miss that part because I was so delighted to hear about the mermaid that I transposed her into that.
I love that.
So this wasn't a terrible nightmare,
No.
but it was a dream in which you were a little distressed in the beginning, and you had a little bit of a dilemma, like should I or shouldn't I? So this we might call a sort of a minor anxiety dream, like in the realm of this is not my in the middle of the dream and in the beginning. But what happened is that you inside of the dream resolved your dilemma on your own.
Yes, yes,
Right?
that was a kind of a very exciting moment in the dream. Or at least when I woke up, I was very excited about that moment, that I resolved the dilemma in the dream. Yes.
Right. So as Jeremy Taylor taught us to say, if this were my dream, or if this were my projection onto your dream, I would say that you are someone who has been doing your work and doing your own spiritual growth, so that when you confronted a dilemma inside of your dream, your highest self, if you will, or your spiritual self, or your higher consciousness came right in through you into the dreamscape in your unconscious to resolve it. Here's where the spiritual piece comes in, because you spoke before also about the symbolism of the mermaid for you, that a mermaid is a being, first of all, it's a woman. And we know that in our society, women are often taught, don't be needy. We're supposed to be the caretakers, not the asking for helpers. And there's all sorts of messages about that. So part of learning to be a strong female adult in the world today is finding that place of balance between when is it the strong thing to do, actually, to ask for help, or the correct thing to do to ask for help? And when is that not only something that we need, but is in the service of our own spiritual growth to do so? And in doing so, we then get to be a model for other young women who are on their way up, who need to know, when should I do it myself, and when is it right to ask for help? And that's a spiritual growth edge right there, to be able to make that discernment. So the other thing that I loved about the mermaid is you talked about this mermaid. She balances between air and water, and she can breathe in both realms. To be able to breathe in more than one realm is quite a gift. That was one of the gifts, actually, in one of the Harry Potter books. Remember the gilly leaf, I think it was called, where they had to do something underwater and they got gills so they could do it underwater. That was part of the magic in one of the Harry Potter stories. And in Hebrew, all of the words for soul and breath are the same words. There's neshama, there's ruach, there's neshima. These mean spirit, these mean soul, and lin shom, our neshama, is our breath. So it's the same thing, which sort of automatically you came to in your dream and your dream work. So there's a spiritual element right there in the dream for you.
Right. well, they're kind of mythical creatures too. So that brings a spiritual element for me. And they're definitely liminal creatures, and they're both of the water and of the air.
Yeah.
So that they cross over to those two sides. And I do sometimes feel like all the time I spend paying attention to dreams makes me a bit of a liminal creature, and that I'm partway in the dream world and partway in the waking world every day.
Mm-hmm.
Linda, I wanted to get to this topic that came up for us kind of last minute, but I'm very curious about the 3 faces of shadow. I want to say a little bit about that.
Sure. So in Jungian parlance, he speaks about our shadow side, which is the part of ourself that we have disowned or we're embarrassed of, or is our dark side, or is the part we'd rather not acknowledge. And he talks about in the archetypes of a personal shadow, and Jung also talks about, of course, a collective unconscious, where we share a dream world, if you will, and a consciousness with all beings on the planet. And one of the things I've been thinking about, particularly as I prepare for a class that I'm starting to teach actually on Monday on ancestral healing through dream work, is how there are 3 aspects to our shadow. There's the personal parts of ourselves that we have pushed away, that we don't want to acknowledge, that are too terrifying to acknowledge, which is what we most often think about when we think about the shadow, the demons lurking in our own personal history. And with trauma, that includes dissociated memory or dissociated affect, because we become fragmented at the time of trauma, and our various self parts can separate. In shamanic tradition, they talk about soul retrieval, and trauma survivors will often use the phrase, it was a soul shattering experience. So we need to come back, right, and put the pieces of ourself together to reintegrate our soul and the various parts of our body. So this is the personal work at the level of the personal shadow. And then there are the stories that have been passed down from generation to generation in our ancestry and in our history, in our personal family line, that we're still carrying for better or for worse, right? And if we're carrying them for better, they're not nightmares, right? They're the family stories of the bright dreams and the hopes and aspirations of your family system or of your tribe or of your peoplehood. And then there are the dark dreams of what your family has struggled with and suffered personally, whether it was being born in Ireland and ancestors who lived through the potato famine, whether it was being from the Eastern Europe or Russia and escaping pogroms, whether it was Southeast Asia and the killing fields, whether it was Holocaust survivors. These are family stories that get passed on. And whether or not we personally have lived through these events, they're passed on through something called, I'm blanking. I just had a momentary.
Is it epigenetics?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for
read your mind.
filling in the blank there. Exactly. Yeah, to the concept of epigenetics, where it's passed on in 2 ways, literally through myelinization of the strands of DNA in our body, and through the environment we grew up in, by how we were parented by the people who they themselves lived through it, or that they were parented by the grandparents who lived through it, or the great-grandparents who lived through it. So there's a layer of the family shadow as well as the second layer of the shadow.
Well, I just want to jump and say that I often feel like I'm healing my ancestors by doing the work that I do. And there's these very large traumatic events that happen kind of on a cultural level, but there's also, the smaller tragedies of families, abuse and incest and other disasters like house burning down that can happen and leave imprints on families as well.
That's right.
I believe the dream work that I'm doing is healing some of that from my ancestors as well. So I love that you bring that out.
And I completely believe that as well, because we know both from our dream work, but also even just from like Einstein's theory of relativity, time is not simply linear, right? We can access the past, the present, and the future as we move back and forth in time and space. And that's actually one of the definitions of what is sacred time, the ability to access the past, the present, and the future all at the same moment. So I totally believe that that's what you're doing as you do your world's work. You're healing your ancestors too. And then you have the opportunity of passing it forward to whether it's children, literally descendants, or your descendants in the form of students or other people who work with you or who know you, who benefit from the healing that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. And then the third class.
Right. The third class is the world shadow.
Yeah,
and this is where it's not
shadow.
limited to our personal families, but it's, the shadow of the big things that we live through, whether it's a world war or a pandemic, or the threat of a Holocaust, or political upheaval, or violence,
climate change,
pollution, climate change, right? These are parts of the world shadow that we, living in the world today, we can't escape from, but we can still address. How do we attend to it in a way that brings healing rather than increased trauma or destruction?
Right. And the dreams really address all those different levels is what you're saying, right? Yep. The many levels of dreams. It's like, I get distressed when I hear somebody say, "Oh, now I know what my dream means." I'm like, no, stop. There's more. There's more. Right. There's other levels. And so I love that you really specify these, like, these are three things to check in any dream.
Yeah.
Like, even my dream of, it's funny, I was going to call it my little dream. My dream, my dream of like accepting that it's okay to ask for help is so big, and like in my family, just to, to not have to be the one to do it all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's for you personally, it's for your family, and it's for the world too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How do we ask for and offer help to each other? What does that mean, living in the world? And what's the shadow that we need to bring the light to around that theme?
Oh, wonderful. So Linda, this is Linda Schiller, and I am really loving this conversation. I want to get greedy here and ask one very specific question in the last few minutes of the show here, is that I'm interested in, I have a specific question about EMDR, which is a kind of a treatment where you use the eyes moving back and forth to desensitize people's reactions to trauma. And I take it that's something that you've used extensively, that you even teach, or that you have experience with EMDR?
I am not certified to teach EMDR. I could if I wanted to get certification, but I am a practitioner. I'm trained in doing EMDR, yes.
Okay,
so I've been doing it for many, many years with
Oh, okay, so you have experience working with trauma survivors and things like that.
Yes. Yes.
So this is just kind of a technical question, but it's something that got in my brain a little while ago. And, when we're sleeping and dreaming, in particular, during dreaming time, the rapid eye movement where eyes are moving back and forth is kind of the same movement as happens during EMDR, where the eyes are moving back and forth following a light or a pencil or something like that, some cue. Is there something about the actual movement of the eyes going back and forth? This is just an even philosophical, like, what do you think kind of question. Are they related? Is there something about the eyes moving back and forth that helps the brain integrate? Is there something in common that dreams are healing and also EMDR is healing around trauma? Does it have to do with the eye movements?
It's a great question. So I'm going to answer it in two ways. The first is that in EMDR, there are the key for doing the eye, it says EM, which is eye movement, and then the desensitization and reprocessing. The underlying philosophy or orientation is that we are using bilateral stimulation, so that we're accessing both sides of our brain, right brain, left brain, and crossing the midline, the corpus callosum, in the process of doing so. So what that allows us to do is access information on our left-sided, linear, pragmatic, mathematical-oriented brain, as well as on our right side, spiritual, creative, non-linear brain. And by crossing back and forth, with the eye movements, we're accessing the information and resources from different parts of our brain and ourselves that we can't as easily access when we're not in this very relaxed state in crossing midline. Mm-hmm. In EMDR, in addition to doing the eye movements, we can also use bilateral stimulation through sound, where there's like tapping, where there's like a beep. People put on headphones and it goes beep in the right ear, beep in the left ear. That creates the bilateral stimulation. Or bilateral tapping on your body, where you can literally take your hands and tap on your right leg and then tap on your left. Or there's one thing that we use with kids called the butterfly hug, where you hook your thumbs together over your sternum and you have your hands on either side of your shoulders. Looks like a butterfly, and then you tap with the right hand and tap with the left. I'm doing it as I'm talking, tap with the right, tap with the left. And kids really love this, the idea of the butterfly hug. But this idea is the bilateral stimulation. So while we're doing bilateral stimulation, whether it's with our eyes or with the tapping or the sounding, there's also our EMDR protocol that allows us to move forward in a cognitive protocol where we put our attention on the upsetting material while we're accessing a fuller part of our brains than we otherwise would be able to create new neural networks.
Okay, so there's something about that bilateral stimulation that seems to stimulate the healing. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and speaking to your question about the eyes, two comments on that. One is, my experience with people is that the eye movement is generally the more intense and strongest way for the EMDR to work, which was the original way it was created. We don't always want the most intense or strongest way to work, so that's where the other ones came into being. And then as I was thinking about it just now, and that speaking of the eyes being the windows of the soul, so it makes me think about doing the eye movements in EMDR and doing the eye movements in rapid eye movement while we're asleep, perhaps is allowing us to access our soul self in a way as well that brings us back to the spiritual connection.
Wonderful. Well, Linda, thank you so much. This is Linda Schiller, Schiller, and I wonder, can you tell folks how to get in touch with you?
Sure. Thank you. Well, you've mentioned my websites. The new book, PTSDreams, has a website of its own, which is ptsdreams.com. And then I have a website that sort of explains my whole professional self, which is lindayaelschiller.com. That's LindaYaelSchiller. And if people want to go straight to email, it's lindayschiller@gmail.com.
Linda, this has been really wonderful. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Oh, you're very welcome, Catherine. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, as always.
All right. See you soon, I'm sure.
All right. Be well.
Bye.
Bye.
4 weeks ago, I did a show with Dr. Claire Johnson about lucid dreaming, which covered an incredible range of topics. I want to play for you here 3 clips from that show. First, a quote about how dreaming is a part of us, and then about accessing your own innate wisdom in dreams and while awake, and finally, a quote about the beauty of sex dreams.
We can't be separate from the dream. How could we possibly be separate from our own dream? We are the dream, and the dream is us. And that's on any level of dreaming, no matter how much, how aware we are. It's all part and parcel of our own psyche and beyond the psyche. So it's like it is us, essentially. So yeah, there's no separation.
Okay. Wow, that is amazing. Have you played around with that kind of idea?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You can tap into a deeper knowing in lucid dreams. And let me just be clear. It's not just in lucid dreams that you have access to this knowledge. It really isn't. You can actually access this knowledge in any state of consciousness, but it's easier in the dream state because we let go of our usual ideas of what reality is. You know, it's much easier to release that in a lucid dream state or in a waking trance state, for example. But in a lucid dream, yeah, you can ask common. And, you know, sex is like this this primal energy that we all have. And people get really embarrassed sometimes about sex dreams, or they find them bewildering, or they're kind of ashamed to share them and stuff. But, it's totally natural, and it's really wonderful to be able to explore sex in our dreams, where we're free, we're not going to catch any STDs,
right?
And it can really be a positive thing to have in our lives. So sometimes sex dreams are symbolic, and other times they are simply there because we have high sexual energy and we let off steam, in our dreams. Every time we are in REM sleep, all of us, every night, we are sexually aroused. That's a natural feature of REM sleep. And so for many people, it's absolutely regular and normal to have sexual dreams that reflect that energy surging up in the dream. And a lot of people, in terms of lucid dreaming, they want to have sex with someone when they become lucid. And I remember, Patricia Garfield, Dr. Patricia Garfield, who was one of the founders of the International Association for the Study of Dreams. She's written a whole book about sexual energy in dreams and how it rises and what you can do with it. And it can also be a vehicle for spiritual awakening. And her book is called Pathways to Ecstasy. Really wonderful book. So that's one I'd recommend to anyone who's interested in kind of finding out more about what you can do with sex dreams and how it can take you to a higher state of consciousness.
If you enjoyed that excerpt, look for the full conversation called Deep Lucid Dreaming with Claire Johnson. You can find it on the Dream Journal, wherever you find podcasts, or on our station page at ksqd.org/the-dream-journal. I am Catherine Bell, and this has been the Dream Journal. Thanks for listening. You can find out about my own dream coaching practice at experientialdreamwork.com. Email me at catherine@ksqd.org. That's KATHERINE @ksqd.org. Do contact me so we can talk about dreams and so I can let you know about my upcoming dream offerings. The Dream Journal is produced at the studios of KSQD in Santa Cruz. Archives and 24/7 live stream at ksqd.org. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review the Dream Journal. I'd like to thank Rick Cluffel, engineer and music creator, also Tony Russimano and Ava Milady. The intro music is Water Over Stones, and this outro music you're listening to right now is called Everything. Both are by Mood Science. You can find the ambient music that plays in the background of this show at pandemia.com. Join me again next Saturday at 10 a.m. And tomorrow morning when you wake up, take a minute to write down your dream and bring it to the next Dream Journal.
I shall